The showdowns last week happened to display the creativity of the Star Wars Unlimited community. We had a plethora of decks ranging from aggro to mid-range to control, ramp, every archetype under the sun that's available in the game currently. But there was one particular list that happened to catch a whole lot of eyes, and it featured a particular leader that honestly, nearly everybody wrote off, but clearly not everyone. And I happen to have an interview with the pilot of that particular build. So let's meet them right now. Let me turn it right over. Can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, my name's Austin. I've been playing Star Wars Unlimited pretty much since that one released. I mainly play at Alternate Universes Bluebell, and this store showdown had happened at one of their other stores, Alternate Universes Homes.
Right, right.
Um, but I've been playing card games now about a little over a year since I've gotten back into it. But I started out playing as a kid and then sort of fell off during middle school and high school, and then now I've come back to it.
Yeah, we joked about that a little bit at locals that I think a lot of people have a similar story where they got real
Yeah,
hyped up and then life kind of takes over or has a way of doing that. And then you move on
yes,
to other things and then rediscover the love. So was it specifically Star Wars that got you back into things, or was it like whether it was Star Wars, the property, this particular game, or what actually drew you back into playing games again?
it was actually I was looking for a place to play board games,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
and so I discovered that Alternate Universes Bluebell had a board game group. So when I was going into there, and then I got reintroduced to the cards and stuff, and then I was at a comic book shop, and unfortunately, I had a didn't have enough money, or I had too much, and so when I asked, they didn't have enough for change, and so he was also selling a deck of starter Pokemon cards there,
Okay.
and I picked that up, and then was like, well, now that I have them, I better use them.
Fair enough.
So I showed up to a locals, was like, this really isn't for me, but then started trying out some other card games from there.
And I've had that bug where you start with one, you're like, this doesn't quite click, but the
Yeah.
taste is all right. Let's see what else is out there. Well, it's great that you got into Star Wars. Obviously, that's where you and I met, and as you mentioned, we've been playing locally at Bluebell. Shout out to Alternate Universes. Although I will say that I don't know if you've had the opportunity, Awesome, but our area is just happens to be flush with a variety of stores that are doing a lot to
Oh
support
yeah.
the game. So shout out to all of them. I went to one of the other alternate universes locations yesterday, but between Red Caps and Top Deck and the Banish Zone and a bunch of stores I haven't even had the chance to get to, they're all great, and it's been a pleasure meeting everybody in the community.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. How did that go for you yesterday?
I did top eight again, but
Okay.
couldn't quite get past Iden. But that's a story for another time.
Yeah.
We got more exciting things to talk about, and that's specifically about how you did with this IG88 list, which on screen next to me is the deck list, and we'll be talking about it. But what was your preparation going into the event? Like, what made you want to run IG88 of all things?
Um. Well, I'd been running it for locals, where we do best of one, and I was actually kind of hesitant because I was like, I think this deck relies a lot on the surprise factor
Yeah,
of it all, like an
definitely.
all space IG88 deck. Like it seems like it shouldn't work at all, and so I was kind of worried, like maybe it doesn't, and once people get over the initial shock of it, it can't really do much.
Mm.
But then at a draft event, before we had started the draft, I played a couple of games against a Boba Green that someone else from our locals was running. And I was like, this person knows what I'm trying to do with this deck. And so when I beat that twice in a row, I was
Uh,
like, maybe I can actually do something with this.
Fair enough.
And then since Holmes was the first store showdown that AU was running, I kind of went into it with, I just kind of want to go and see what sort of things people are running. I was planning on going to the one at Bluebell next week, but unfortunately I won't be able to now. But at the time I was kind of thinking like, oh well, I can just use this sort of as a practice run.
Makes sense.
Maybe I'll turn a few heads with the IG88 deck.
You definitely did that.
Yeah, so I went into it, and then probably by round 3, I was going up against Alea, and I ended up winning 2-1. So at that point, I was 2-1 overall, and I was like, "Well, maybe I got a shot." And then for round 4, I was sitting at table number 3. So I was like, "Oh, yeah, maybe I do have a shot to top 8 this." And so I went up against a red, yellow Sabine,
Mm.
took that to game 3 and ended up winning 2-1. So now I'm sitting at 3-1 going into the final round, and I think I might actually have a shot.
Yeah, yeah.
And I went against Luke Green and ended up losing 2-1, but it was enough to just make it through to the top 8. I was literally number 8.
Nice. Well, I mean, whether you top it first or eighth, you still got
Yeah.
there, which is the accomplishment. And I I'm not a betting man, but if somebody were to be a betting person, I imagine they would not have put much money on IG88 unless the odds were like astronomical going in. But I think
Yeah, and I
as
think if they had seen that it was all space too, they would have even been like, "No, there's no shot. All space doesn't work."
well, the mad scientist here was able to crack the code here on IG88, and I've mentioned it elsewhere, and you and I were discussing it that I feel that the idea of overloading space, because a lot of decks are soft in space,
Mhm.
has value. Whether that bears out over the long term, if we get more Sentinels
Right.
or other decks just are more even or whatever. But right now, yeah, you have System Patrol Craft. You maybe have the Green Gladiator Star Destroyer or whatever it's called. You could have Bright Hope, stuff like that. But past a certain point, you can just kind of go face the whole time. Is that what your experience was throughout the day?
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting is because in TCGs like this, there's usually this aspect of someone's playing the beatdown, someone's playing the control.
Yeah.
But when I'm going all space and most of the opponents are going, mostly ground, there's really no way for anyone to be the control because there's such limited interaction between both of our units.
Oh, yeah. You make people super uncomfortable at that stage.
Yeah. And so we're both kind of racing. And then what's interesting about this deck that I was discovering the more I played it was it's like as we're, turning that final corner of the race, I'm
Hmm.
tripping you at the finish line and then turning all my jet propelled, running shoes. So it's like we're racing this whole time and then I'm just gonna, you know,
you got
pull
the
ahead very quickly.
you got the secret weapon in your pocket and nobody knows.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about leading into the event and then a little bit about the event itself, but let's talk about the deck and the components that are actually there. Clearly, oops, all space, other than
Yeah.
IG88 himself, I guess. But were there any, we'll say, MVPs of the deck or anybody that's the low light that may be riding the pine the next time you just leave it up?
Uh, I think the major star, if I had to pick one, is Outmaneuver. Um,
I
that
could see
card is
that.
incredible value when most of your units are well, all of your units are in space and most of your opponents are on the ground.
Yep.
Uh, there were quite a few times, especially in aggro matchups, where I could tell my opponents like, once it gets back to me, I'm just gonna win. And then
Right.
it's like, here's outmaneuver, and then they're just like, actually, I have nothing. I'm just gonna take the initiative and hope to win on the next turn. And
Uh,
then, oh, there's no next turn
yeah.
because I just pushed for 18 to 20 damage or something.
Yeah, the outmaneuver being a 3 cost time walk essentially. You blank your
Hmm.
opponent's entire set of actions that turn for most intents and purposes seems
Hmm.
incredible. So walk it because I know a bunch of people after the list got out there once AU posted it. Uh, a lot of people were sleeving this up and trying it, and they couldn't quite grok what was necessary. So can you walk us through the outmaneuver turn? Like what turn does that happen, and what do you do?
Yeah. So really, what I'm trying to do is the reason I put it in originally was because as I was making this IG88 deck, I was like, well, IG88 seems to have a really good ability, and I'm pretty sure his strength stat or attack stat is tied for the highest of all the leaders.
Yeah.
I think Vader's the only one that has that same stat line,
Right.
or I mean, same attack stat. So he's got quite a few things going for him, but he's just so frail and fragile.
Yeah, for
So I
sure.
was trying to figure out ways, how do I protect him? And then I came across Outmaneuver, and I'm like, well, this is great, but it's going to hurt all of my stuff too, because it would exhaust all of my units if I had been playing ground. And so that's what sort of led me into the space. And so what this really came down to was, okay, I need to protect IG when I deploy him so that I can push for a bunch of damage.
Right.
And so that's where the outmaneuver comes in. And usually, what I'm looking to do is grab the initiative going into that turn where I have 5 resources
Hmm.
and play outmaneuver right off the jump. And then what I want to try and do is bait out my opponent to use resources so that they can't surprise me and take out IG88.
Right. Yeah, delay him as long as you humanly can so that you can
Right,
ensure you're getting the value. That definitely makes
right.
sense.
Yeah, and so like one of the things I would usually try and do is use IG88's leader ability first before deploying him to still get the 1 extra damage on something
Yeah.
and just try and stall an extra action. Um, or if my opponent, is just sitting on their resources, I just don't deploy IG88 and I just
Ooh, okay.
keep swinging at them and let them sit on those resources and then take the initiative and
Probably
maybe I
just
go
end the
onto an
game on
outmaneuver and
the.
do it all over again.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes sense. I mean, you make it sound so clean and simple that it's just like, well, there's nothing they can do. I'm just going to outmaneuver and then run them over.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but then, when you actually play it, you get to those turns where you don't have the outmaneuver. And so that's
Mhm.
sort of, I guess I'd say the trick with the deck is it feels really good to make that push on the first chance you get, but
Right.
you don't have to. The deck can actually go surprisingly well into the mid game against quite a
Ooh,
lot of stuff.
okay.
Against aggro like Sabine, you kind of don't have a choice.
Well, yeah, like you were saying earlier, you're on two different pathways. They're on the ground, you're in the air, and you're
Yeah,
never going to cross.
yeah. But against some of the more control style stuff, I'd say, yeah, there's definitely real opportunities to sort of just delay that push until you're in a good board state
Gotcha.
um, to set that up. Because usually I'd be looking to have at least 3 things on the board, preferably 4. Usually, if there's 4 things on the board and I have either uh, a surprise strike or a keep fighting in hand,
Hmm.
it's pretty much a guaranteed
I mean, that's almost
one
lethal
turn
just
kill.
from that because you have enough
Yeah.
things that are 3, 4
Oh, yeah.
attack plus the raid plus the attack from IG plus the other cards. It adds up
Yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah, I was thinking about the other day and I was like, even with sort of the worst 3 space cards I could reasonably still have, like, if I had just a mining guild, just an outer rim headhunter, and, like, a disabling fang fighter,
Hmm.
they still each, because of the raid 1 from IG,
Right,
that can
right.
be 4, 3, 2 damage, that's 9 right there. If I keep fighting the, disabling fang fighter, that's another 4 for, 13, and then IG hits for 5, so that's 18 damage in a single turn.
That's an astonishing amount of damage. And obviously, it wasn't like you were doing nothing prior to that. So, virtually
Right.
any 25 health base is probably up in smoke at that stage.
Yes, yeah.
So, speaking
And
of.
again, that's
Oh,
sort of
good.
like with the worst case scenario board state that I'd be going for a push in.
Right, right.
Um, Obviously, if they control my board state better than that, I would try not to go for the push. But
Makes sense.
there were, yeah, there were definitely scenarios where it's like I got so much on board, and then I hit the outmaneuver,
Mhm.
and it's just over.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. So speaking of 25 health bases, you're running Jedha City as compared to one of the 30s. Was the epic action there relevant for you on the day? Do you feel like you would continue to use that going forward?
Yeah, that one's really a tough call because the 5 extra health, I mean, Jeddah City only prevents 4 damage if you use it against something attacking your base. So
Right.
in that scenario, it's always better to just have had the 5 health.
Right.
The real significance of that, I think, is one of the biggest things that concerns me is overwhelming barrage, which is one of the only. Uh, it's not the only, but it's one of the very few AOE uh, removal effects.
Right. Or certainly one
Um,
that can come down early enough to interact with you.
yes, yeah. So what's good about that is I can use Jetta City's epic action to, you know, completely invalidate what they would normally try and use to do the overwhelming barrage. And then not only have I stopped that from doing a bunch of damage to my base, I've now also stopped them from clearing my board. So
Right.
that's one of the use cases. Another one where it's really useful is Sentinel spacecraft. The turn they
Oh,
play
good
it,
point. Good
I
point.
Jetta City it, take it out with my stuff without losing them. So I still maintain my board presence,
Mhm.
and I really only lose out on a couple of damage to base.
Yeah, getting the plow through in that fashion definitely that's got to be scary from the other side, but pretty much the entire deck has got to be terrifying from anything that isn't presenting back-to-back sentinels or a ton of removal.
Right.
Because everything
Yeah.
here is, like you said, it seems like it's consistent pressure and constant pressure, and you can push some of these things due to the upgrades that you have either into larger threats or outside of specific removal range. For example, I was looking at the TIE Fighter, Mining Guild TIE Fighter specifically earlier,
Mhm.
and it dawned on me, hey, if it has smuggling compartment or infiltrator skill, now make an opening doesn't kill it. You have to have another
Yes.
card to actually kill it.
Yes. Yeah, that's those upgrades, especially smuggling compartment,
Hmm.
uh, are really beneficial. And not just for the health ranges, but also for damage. Like I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
keep fighting is one of those that I try and use on my push turn,
Hmm.
because it only costs two, which means you can play both it and outmaneuver on the turn you deploy IG88.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a way to get some of those smaller things still up to uh, closer to that three power
Hmm.
without going over. And it's also just really good with keep fighting because it readies a resource if you use smuggling compartment.
Yeah. That
So you
that's
can attack with it, ready a resource,
mm,
keep fighting it, attack again, ready a resource again, and then surprise strike something, you
that's
know?
bonkers. I mean, I was thinking not for that end, but the readying a resource, because one of the challenges I've run into with other decks is a lot of the blue control builds right now can match you. If you play one threat, they play one
Yeah.
removal. Then you play one threat, then they play one removal. And it just continues this way until they go, oops, here's an Avenger, here's a Devastator,
Yeah.
here's a whatever. This build, because of smuggling compartment, you can do things similar to what Boba decks do. You cheat
Yeah.
resources, and then, hey, it's two TIE fighters. It's a cartel spacer and something else. It's this and that. And then,
Absolutely.
yeah, you can remove one, but I'm always, as the aggro, coming out a little bit ahead by continuing to apply threats. Or at least on paper, that seems like how it would work out.
Yeah, and that is in the games where I did win against sort of like the double blue Iden, I played against that player,
Mhm.
who I think ended up taking second. I lost 1-2 against him, but in the one where I won, that was definitely helpful, being able to get out multiple things because they can really only remove one at a time, as you said, with vigilance and takedown. And sort of with those cards too, it's most of my stuff is pretty low costed.
Right.
So they're using, you know, four resource cards to take out some of my stuff that might only cost two,
Yeah.
but just because that's kind of the biggest threat on the table at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely makes sense. It's usually the other way around. The removal is more efficient than the threat, and that's how you get an advantage. Here, not quite the same plan.
Right, because the removal is the only thing they have to interact with my stuff, and they definitely can't let the board just grow out of control.
Exactly. So we talked a little bit about the highlights of the deck. Is there anything that you wish you had slotted out for something else that maybe going forward you're going to modify?
Yeah, so I think we had talked about our locals, but
Mm,
I had used open fire in the main with waylay in the sideboard,
mm,
and I think I'd either try and run a mixture of them or maybe all waylay, because
okay.
the main purpose I'm using open fire for is um, to remove something that is too much of a threat.
Right.
Waylay can kind of do the same thing in some
For sure. Yeah.
scenarios. But open fire is still really good because one of the biggest threats to the deck, I think, is Millennium Falcon on the earliest turn possible.
Yeah, that I could see how that could present a challenge.
Yeah, because that trades very well into all of my stuff, and they can always just bounce it back to hand, so I never can interact with it.
Right.
And so open fire is very useful in that sense.
Yeah, Waylay
But
probably feels worse into that, but it's still not terrible because they are forced into. They don't have a
right,
choice about bouncing it. They have to replay it.
right. But as I said, this deck can sort of go into the mid range, and in those cases, Waylay I feel like is very, very helpful.
I can
Um,
see it.
yeah, ground units that have Sentinel, you'd normally think, oh well, that's not a problem because I'm not in ground. But on the turn I deploy IG88, I mean, he's definitely that 5 damage is a big part of
Oh, it's a
the
huge
push
chunk.
I'm making.
Yeah,
So Sentinels can still be pretty useful in ground, which is where Waylay is very helpful. And then that leads
I
into
can
one
see it.
of the other changes I think I would make is the upgrade that gives Saboteur. I'd probably sideboard that
Okay.
and use Force Lightning instead. Um,
It's a good call. Good call.
yeah, because that blank Sentinel for a whole phase, which is kind of what I want to do. You
Right.
know, I only want to push for one phase. Whereas the upgrade is nice because it gives the +1/+1, but
Mm.
only allowing one thing to bypass Sentinel isn't always great.
Yeah. Getting it's. I think we had actually talked about this also. I forget when, but in Sabine decks and other lists like Leia, things like that, they're running Spec Force Soldier, and
Yeah,
it helps you to interact with, say, Childson, which is less of an impact here, but still could be a problem for the IG turn. But the point is, you play that one cost, you blank the Sentinel, you get in for 8, 9, 10 damage, whatever it happens to
hmm,
be. I think it's the same principle here. You force lightning. Admittedly, you don't have a body, but it's the villain equivalent to being able to spec
yep,
force the Sentinel out of the way. So I think that's a good call, and I do like the idea of waylays because I would imagine things like Bright Hope, you can certainly punch through them. You have access to surprise strike after all, and you could run something in an interceptor or whatever, but probably presents a few challenges. So I think having waylay is a more
yeah,
universal answer, whether it's ground or space, to say, I don't care what that is, I'm just getting rid of it for a little bit. That's good enough because time, you got that window. You got to thread the needle before they start to take over.
yes, absolutely, yeah. Like I said, you can delay that push, but yeah, you can't delay it forever. And
Right.
so,
So you had mentioned offline that because I didn't have it from the deck list, uh, that you did actually have a board. So what was it, or what do you think the board is moving forward for this deck? Because you talked about the infiltrator's skill, but what else is showing up there?
so right now in the board, I have sneak attack, and I think I would probably try and main board that because I got 3 surprise strikes, 3 keep fighting. Sneak attack is also a 2 cost. So for
Mm,
that, big push turn, I could sneak attack in something 3 or less. So I'd probably try and run 2 of each of those. But something else that's kind of interesting is once people start to expect the outmaneuver on that turn,
hmm
they try and play around it. And so that's where I think we had talked about you could do like a sneak attack and a ruthless raider.
Yeah, that
And that,
seems like a sick turn.
yeah, that's if they don't defeat it before it attacks their base, it's putting 8 damage on,
It's a big
two
chunk.
from entering, 4 from attacking, 2 from leaving. So that can also be a good push. So that's in the sideboard now. I'd probably like to move that in. The other thing is bombing run.
Mm.
And that is specifically there for Grand Inquisitor.
We do have, I'll call an infestation of that at locals. There's a
Yes.
few of them running around.
Um, yeah, Grand Inquisitor kind of doesn't care about it because he can ready things anyways. They're
Yeah,
probably playing some keep fightings of their own.
for sure.
But that's where bombing run actually comes in really nice because since he's constantly pinging his own stuff and keeping them on low health,
Mhm.
bombing run can just completely annihilate the board.
I could definitely see that. I mean, it also just has value as additional sort of outmaneuvers in the sense that,
Yeah.
all right, I'm going to blow up ground and leave space unscathed.
Yep.
It's definitely an idea to consider. So in general, if somebody were to pick up this deck tomorrow, like I said, there were a number of people that sleeved this up as soon as they saw the list and had some success. Others didn't go so well.
Hmm.
Any advice you'd give to people or any other like real quick thoughts as we close out for what people should keep in mind for this deck?
Yeah, as I said, it's kind of going for one big push. So I think it's easy to look at it and be like, oh, it's aggro, but it doesn't necessarily play like a Sabine aggro.
Mm-hmm.
So you can give up turns early on to remove a pesky sentinel in space, or um, to remove a Millennium Falcon or something. Um, you don't constantly have to be pushing at the base, because what you're really trying to do is establish a safe presence to deploy IG and push for um, ludicrous amounts of damage.
Yeah. Makes
And
sense.
I think that's where, because I know you had mentioned the Golden Dice podcast. I played it. I watched them play it,
Mm-hmm.
and then talk about it. Yeah, I had a chuckle to myself. On their podcast the other day, they were saying, "I wonder how it would do into the aggro matchup," and I was laughing. I was like, "Those were the only matchups I actually won against in the Store Showdown."
Yeah. Yeah, I think the deck may seem simplistic on its surface, but there's a lot of depth because you are so all in on certain aspects that you need to ensure that certain scenarios manifest. And then it's, kind of baiting your opponent into certain plays so you can outmaneuver them, or that you can just set it up that surprise you're dead because you didn't account for XYZ, whether it's keep fighting or the mining compartment opening up more resources so you could
Yeah.
surprise strike, whatever it happens to be. Or maybe the sneak attack Ruthless Raider plan in the future. We'll see. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on and talking to me about this, Austin. Where can people find you, or any other shout outs you want to do as we're closing things out?
Yeah, I'm not really on social media, but
Okay.
I am, as I
Lucky
said,
you.
am alternate universes Bluebell most of the time.
Okay.
So
Well, if you got
I'd like to
anything
give them a
else
shout
cooking,
out.
if you got any other decks cooking, we'd love to get them on here, because this one definitely was, it caught everybody by surprise, I think, which is really
Yeah,
cool that I had seen a lot of comments in other places and heard some from other players at different events that are feeling that, oh, well, the meta is stagnant or things are established. It's all well known. And I don't think that's true. I think there's still a lot of things to discover in just set one, and we're only a couple months away from set two. So things are going to get turned up even further.
yeah, absolutely. There's also this element, I guess, of when really good players get comfortable with a deck and they keep running it,
Mm.
it kind of looks like, well, that's the only deck that's good. And that
Yeah,
might not necessarily be true. It might just be a really good player really likes that deck.
exactly. No, I'm with you on that, because sometimes the pilot can make it look unstoppable. I've seen that in a ton of games. And you made this list look pretty good. So I know I want to sleeve it up, but I need a few more strafing gunships, or I got to find another
I
space thing to
appreciate
slot
that.
in. But that's going to do it for this time. Thank you, Austin, for coming out. If you want to check out more Star Wars and other content, hit up the links in the description, all that fun stuff, the likes and subscribes. But that's going to do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and tune in next time for more Random's Thoughts.